Welcome back to another Explainer. I am so incredibly pumped you're here today because, honestly, we're going to completely dismantle a myth that's been trapping so many people in just endless, exhausting work. We're diving into precision beekeeping today, and specifically, we're looking at this fascinating concept called the yield dead point. You know, a lot of folks think beekeeping is just this simple numbers game, right? Like more hives just automatically equals more honey. Well, today we're going to look at the hard science of system efficiency over sheer hive numbers. And trust me, the data we're going to look at is absolutely going to blow your mind.
Let's just jump right into a really jarring paradox. Imagine two apiaries sitting literally right next to each other in the exact same year. Okay, so beekeeper A has 28 colonies, and at the end of the season, they're averaging 38 kilograms of honey per colony. Awesome. But then their neighbor, beekeeper B, has 52 colonies, but they only pull in 21 kilograms per colony. If you actually do the math on that, they both produced almost the exact same total amount of honey. No way, right? But the beekeeper with 52 colonies did double the physical labor, they bought double the medication, built double the frames, and honestly probably took on double the stress. So the big question is, why on earth would anyone do double the work for the exact same reward?
To dismantle this trap, here's our roadmap for today. We're looking at 1. The illusion of scale, 2. Ecology's carrying capacity, 3. The threat of density, 4. The line problem, and 5. Calculating the sweet spot.
All right, part 1, the illusion of scale. You know, it is so incredibly tempting to just put all your hives in one single place. I mean, it saves on fuel, it saves on labor, it's just easier. But that comfort-driven logic leads straight into what we call the yield dead point. What is that? Well, it's this invisible, highly damaging moment when adding just one more colony to your meadow doesn't actually increase your total apiary yield anymore. In fact, it actually begins to drag it down. Today, we really need to stop looking at bees as pets and start looking at them as working units that are operating inside a strictly limited energy system.
Which brings us right to part 2, ecology's carrying capacity. To really understand our limits here, we have to borrow a concept from ecology, which is often represented by the letter K, carrying capacity. This is simply the maximum number of individuals an ecosystem can support before resources are entirely depleted and the whole system just starts to collapse. You see, nectar is not this infinite magical fountain. It's a fixed mathematical limit. Every hectare of land produces a very specific amount of sugar. If you divide that fixed amount of nectar by way too many bees, you're not doing strong beekeeping anymore. You're creating what's called social beekeeping, where literally nobody has enough, everyone is starving, and your bees end up burning their energy trying to rob each other instead of gathering from flowers.
Let me show you exactly how that carrying capacity gets eaten up in the real world. Let's say you've got 100 hectares of sunflower around you. Theoretically, you might think, wow, that's a massive 5,000 kilograms of honey. But hold on, let's do the math. Step 1, you start with your 5,000. Step 2, you have to subtract 10% instantly because wild pollinators and bumblebees, they're going to take their share. Step 3, subtract another 30% for bad weather, wind, or drought. And then step 4, and guys, this is the big one, subtract 80 to 100 kilograms per colony just to cover the bee's own basic survival, brood heating, and flight energy. You, the beekeeper, only get what is left at the very, very bottom of this equation. So if you just drop 150 colonies on this field, the bees will consume every single drop of that nectar just to survive, leaving you with absolutely zero. Plus, we really have to look at the geometry of hunger here. A bee doesn't just fly all the way out to the horizon. She has a strict economic radius of about 1.5 kilometers. Now, a 1.5 kilometer radius equals roughly 700 hectares of land. Sounds massive, right? But out of those 700 hectares, how much is actually producing nectar? You've got to subtract the roads, the rooftops, river surfaces, weed fields, all of that. In reality, you might only have 120 hectares of truly active forage. Our visual assumptions of the landscape are honestly almost always completely wrong.
Which leads to this absolutely fantastic quote from our source material today. It says, if you bring a truck of 100 colonies onto just 120 effective hectares, you are not practicing beekeeping, you are practicing beekeeping tourism. I absolutely love that phrasing because it perfectly describes economic entropy. Your bees are flying out, landing on a flower, realizing a neighbor's bee has already emptied it, and flying all the way home with nothing. They're literally burning precious fuel for absolutely zero return.
Moving on to part 3, the threat of density.
Now we're shifting from resource scarcity into epidemiology. We've got to apply network theory here, specifically Metcalfe's law. This states that the risk in a network actually grows with the square of the number of users. Think about it like this.
If you triple your colonies on a single site, let's say you go from 30 hives up to 90, you don't just triple your disease risk, you square it. You've just increased your risk of disease transmission by 9 times. 9 times!
High density creates a literal highway for viruses. When an apiary is overcrowded, the whole environment becomes hyper-competitive. Exhausted bees returning from forage get confused and they drift into the wrong hives. So an infected bee from colony 1 ends up over in colony 50, bringing Varroa mites, deformed wing virus, and nosema right through the front door. In a small apiary, a misdiagnosis is just a contained local incident. But in an overcrowded apiary, that exact same mistake becomes an unstoppable forest fire that can wipe out your entire operation.
Let's look at part 4, the line problem. If you look at, I'd say 90% of apiaries out there, the hives are placed in these long, perfect straight lines because, let's be honest, it looks fantastic in a photo, but for the bees, it is an absolute orientation nightmare. This setup causes a physical glitch called asymmetrical growth. When tired, heavy bees return from foraging, they instinctively gravitate toward the ends of the row or toward really prominent visual landmarks. And what does that mean? It means those middle colonies are constantly being starved of their workforce. Beekeepers will open up a struggling middle hive and just assume, oh, I have a failing queen. No! The queen is perfectly fine. Her hardworking foragers are just being inadvertently stolen by the super strong colonies at the very ends of the line.
But the solution here is incredibly simple. Instead of a traditional straight line that causes all this high drifting, just break the line. By simply arranging your hives into a horseshoe shape, or even just distinct groups of 5 with a little bit of space between them, you reduce drifting by up to 70%. You instantly equalize the strength of your colonies. It's a completely free strategy, and it's going to save you hours and hours of frustrating work trying to balance your hives later in the season.
Finally, part 5, calculating the sweet spot.
Let's bring all of this into some actionable economics. Take 100 colonies. If you put all 100 in one single location, sure, your fuel cost is low, but your disease risk is massive, and overcrowding drops your yield down to just 15 kilograms per colony. That means your total is 1,500 kilograms of honey. But if you break those exact same 100 colonies into 3 satellite locations of 33 colonies each, yeah, your fuel cost goes up a bit. However, your disease risk just plummets because they're now isolated systems. And more importantly, with way less competition, your yield jumps to 25 kilograms per colony. So your total yield is now 2,500 kilograms. Just by breaking up the apiary, you generated a massive 1,000 kilogram surplus.
And that leaves us with this undeniable economic truth. Fuel is cheaper than honey. People constantly resist decentralizing because they just don't want to pay for the extra gas to drive to 3 different locations. But think about it. Does that extra gas cost the equivalent of 1,000 kilograms of honey? Absolutely not. No way. The opportunity cost of that extra driving is easily and massively paid for by the better utilization of the surrounding territory. Oh, and there is one silent bottleneck we absolutely cannot ignore here: water. At peak season, just to cool the brood, one strong colony consumes an entire liter of water a day. So if you have 100 colonies in one place, they need 100 liters of water a day. If you only provide a tiny puddle or a single little barrel, it really doesn't matter how much nectar is out in the field. You are going to face a complete logistical collapse. The bees are going to spend all their time waiting in line for water instead of collecting honey.
So to wrap up our explainer today, the core philosophy you really must adopt is that less is often more. Having fewer colonies per location directly results in less competition, vastly fewer diseases, much stronger individual colonies, and ultimately more honey per invested euro and hour of your time. Our source material strongly advises that if your terrain can theoretically support 60 colonies, you should actually only place 40. Leave a 30% safety margin for bad weather or even neighboring beekeepers moving in. Be the manager of your ecosystem, not its destroyer.
But of course, all of this completely assumes your hives are staying in one place. What happens when that perfectly calculated point dries up, the season shifts, and you decide to put wheels under your hives? Well, in our next explainer, we are going to dive headfirst into the Great Migration, the high-speed, high-risk logistics of mobile beekeeping. Until then, calculate your sweet spot, respect the carrying capacity, and thank you so much for learning with me today.